Welcome to your channel name. As global politics continue to shift and evolve, some countries are increasingly turning against the United States. From rising tensions with longtime adversaries to deteriorating relationships with former allies, the international landscape is becoming increasingly complex. In this video, we'll count down 10 countries that are turning against the United States in 2025. From economic rivalries to military conflicts, we'll explore the key factors driving these nations' growing hostility towards America. Let's dive in and examine the countries that are increasingly challenging U.S. interests and influence around the world. 10. Iran, a country in the Middle East, has had a tumultuous relationship with the United States for decades. The 1979 Islamic Revolution, which overthrew the US-backed Shah, marked a significant turning point in the relationship. Since then, tensions have persisted due to Iran's nuclear program, support for terrorism, and human rights record. The US has imposed severe sanctions on Iran, including restrictions on oil exports and financial transactions. In 2018, the US withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, a nuclear deal negotiated between Iran, the US, and other world powers. Iran has responded by increasing its uranium enrichment activities and attacking US interests in the region. The US has maintained a strong military presence in the region and has imposed maximum pressure on Iran to change its behavior. The standoff between the two nations remains a significant source of tension in the Middle East. 9. Syria, a country in the Middle East, has been embroiled in a devastating civil war since 2011. The conflict, sparked by protests against President Bashar al-Assad's regime, has resulted in widespread human suffering, displacement, and destruction. The US has been involved in the conflict, providing support to opposition groups and conducting airstrikes against terrorist organizations such as ISIS. However, the US has also been critical of Assad's regime, imposing sanctions and calling for his removal. The conflict has been further complicated by the involvement of other regional and global powers, including Russia, Iran, and Turkey. The US has sought to promote a peaceful resolution to the conflict, but the complexities of the situation have made it challenging to achieve. The humanitarian crisis in Syria remains dire, with millions of people in need of assistance and no clear end to the conflict in sight. 8. Libya, a North African country, has been a concern for the US due to its instability and vulnerability to terrorist groups. After Muammar Gaddafi's overthrow in 2011, Libya descended into chaos, with rival militias and governments vying for power. The US has been involved in Libya's conflict, conducting airstrikes against terrorist groups like ISIS and supporting the internationally recognized Government of National Accord, GNA. However, Libya's instability and lack of effective governance have raised concerns about combating terrorism and securing borders. The US has criticized Libya's human rights record, imposing sanctions on individuals and entities accused of abuses. Furthermore, Libya's strategic location along the Mediterranean and its significant oil reserves make its stability crucial for regional and global security. The US continues to navigate this complex situation, seeking to promote stability and counter terrorism in Libya. 7. Pakistan, a nuclear-armed nation in South Asia, has had a complex and often tumultuous relationship with the United States. While the two countries have cooperated on counter-terrorism efforts and shared strategic interests, tensions have persisted due to concerns over Pakistan's support for militant groups and its nuclear program. The US has provided significant financial and military aid to Pakistan, but has also imposed sanctions and suspended assistance due to disagreements over Islamabad's counter-terrorism efforts. Pakistan's relationship with China, including the multi-billion-dollar China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC) project, has also raised concerns in Washington about Beijing's growing influence in the region. As a result, the US-Pakistan relationship remains fragile, with both countries seeking to balance their competing interests and maintain a delicate partnership. 6. Russia, a resurgent global power, has become a major challenge to the United States. The two nations have been engaged in a complex and contentious relationship, marked by disagreements over security, energy, and ideology. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, support for separatist rebels in Ukraine, and alleged interference in the 2016 US presidential election have raised tensions with the US. The US has responded by imposing sanctions on Russian individuals and entities, expelling Russian diplomats, and strengthening NATO's military presence in Eastern Europe. Russia's authoritarian governance model, human rights record, and assertive foreign policy have also sparked concerns in Washington. Moscow's actions in the Middle East, particularly its support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, have further complicated relations with the US. As the rivalry between the US and Russia continues to escalate, the world is witnessing a new era of great power competition with significant implications for global security, stability, and governance. 5. China, a rising global superpower, has become an increasingly significant challenge to the United States. The two nations have been engaged in a complex and multifaceted rivalry encompassing trade, technology, security, and ideology. China's rapid economic growth, military modernization, and expanding global influence have raised concerns in Washington about the potential erosion of American dominance. The US has responded by implementing tariffs on Chinese goods, restricting Chinese investments, and strengthening alliances with regional partners. China's authoritarian governance model, human rights record, and assertive foreign policy have also sparked tensions with the US. Beijing's actions in the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and along the Indian border have raised concerns about regional stability and security. As the competition between the US and China continues to intensify, the world is witnessing a new era of great power rivalry with significant implications for global governance, economic development, and international relations. 4. Venezuela, a country in South America, has been embroiled in a deepening crisis under the authoritarian rule of President Nicolas Maduro. The US has imposed severe sanctions on Venezuela's government and state-owned oil company, PDVSA, in response to human rights abuses, corruption, and electoral manipulation. The sanctions, which target key officials and restrict oil exports, aim to pressure Maduro's administration to restore democratic norms and respect human rights. The US has also recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's interim president, further straining relations with Maduro's government. The crisis in Venezuela has had far-reaching consequences, including widespread poverty, food shortages, and mass migration. The US has provided humanitarian aid to Venezuela, but Maduro's government has rejected it, accusing the US of attempting to destabilize the country. As the situation continues to deteriorate, the US is likely to maintain its pressure on Maduro's government, seeking a peaceful resolution to the crisis. 3. Belarus, a landlocked country in Eastern Europe, has been a source of concern for the United States due to its authoritarian government and close ties with Russia. President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus with an iron fist since 1994, suppressing opposition and independent media. The US has imposed sanctions on Belarusian officials and entities, citing human rights abuses and undermining of democratic institutions. Additionally, Belarus' strategic location between Russia and NATO member states has made it a critical player in regional security. Belarus' close ties with Russia have also raised concerns in Washington. The two countries have a union state agreement which aims to integrate their economies and militaries. The US has warned Belarus against allowing Russian military bases on its territory, which could potentially threaten NATO's eastern flank. As a result, the US has sought to isolate Belarus diplomatically and economically while promoting democratic values and human rights in the country. 2. Nicaragua, a country in Central America, has experienced deteriorating relations with the United States in recent years. The US has imposed sanctions on the Nicaraguan government, citing human rights abuses, corruption, and undermining of democratic institutions. The sanctions, which target key government officials and their families, aim to pressure President Daniel Ortega's administration to reverse its authoritarian tendencies and restore democratic norms. The US has also expressed concerns over Nicaragua's growing ties with China, Russia, and Venezuela, which have provided the country with significant economic and military aid. The tensions between Nicaragua and the US have significant implications for the region. Nicaragua's strategic location in Central America makes it a critical player in regional security and trade. The US has traditionally maintained a strong presence in the region, but Nicaragua's growing ties with rival powers threaten to undermine American influence. As a result, the US is likely to continue to pressure Nicaragua to reverse its authoritarian course and align with Western democratic values. 1. The Balkans, a region in southeastern Europe, has experienced strained relations with the United States in recent years. While the US has historically been involved in the region's peacekeeping and stabilization efforts, particularly in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and North Macedonia, tensions have risen due to concerns over corruption, human rights, and Russia's growing influence. The US has imposed sanctions on certain individuals and entities in the region, citing human rights abuses, corruption, and undermining of democratic institutions. Additionally, the Balkans' growing economic and energy ties with China and Russia have raised concerns in Washington, fueling fears of a shift away from Western influence and towards authoritarianism. As a result, the US has sought to reassert its presence in the region, promoting democratic values, rule of law, and economic development.